is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. When I feel afraid and think I've lost my way, still you're there right beside me. Nothing will I fear as long as you are near. Please be near me to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I will not forget your love for me, and yet my heart forever is wandering. Jesus, be my guide and hold me to your side, and I will love you to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word, for the inspiration that you give to us, that you pass on to us through revelation, that you enable for us to pass on to one another. We thank you for your Holy Spirit that helps us to read your word, to understand it, and for it to give us revelation for our lives. As we study these steps today of spiritual progress toward you, we ask that you'd be with us, teach us, open our minds, encourage us. We thank you for all of us here gathered in your name, we pray. Amen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I think I turned the music off all the way.
I was going to say, I hear music.
All right, there we go. All right, glad to see everybody here. We doing all right?
Yes.
Doing good today? Thank you for those that are joining online today. We got Maggie and Judy that are joining us online, so good to see you. And welcome to our Wednesday 10 a.m. Bible study. And Diane just popped in too, so good to see you as well. We made it to chapter 4. Yeah, there's only 8 or 9 steps to go. And good morning, Paula. Good to see you. Glad that you're joining us today. So, if we are to review what we've gone through with these 3 steps, we have beginning with powerlessness, an acknowledgement of our powerlessness. We that's okay. We drew the connection between sin and addiction, and I think that's still something worth coming back to and examining. As we get into step 4, as we start to look deeper into more of ourselves and our own experience, we probably are going to go back to that concept of sin and addiction and see where that comes to play in our own life. So we start with powerlessness, and that means that we come to recognize we cannot fix this on our own. We might be able to make some kind of an effort, but ultimately we find we can't do it. We can't even do it with each other, but we're dependent on something else. So step 2, what is step 2?
Can you believe in a power greater than ourselves?
All right, so we acknowledge there's a power greater than ourselves, that's greater than me, greater than you, greater than all of us together. And that's the divine, that's God with us. As Christians, it's the work of the Trinity in our lives. It's the work of Christ. It's the work of Christ embodied within us. It's the work of the Spirit that is ongoing. It's the mystery and source of all things in the Father. So that's the second. The third is that we believe in that power, right? And so we've talked about that as well. Now, no, I'm sorry. That's number two. Number three is acceptance. So we've come to accept. And that's coming to accept the work of God in our lives. That's where our salvation comes. That's where our help comes. That's where real transformation comes. And we work together with God for that to be effective. But the way that we do that work is through surrender and acceptance, which oddly enough, it's actually easier to do things and to make efforts than it is to stop making efforts and give up. It's we like to keep our hand on the wheel. We like to have some control and to completely give up all of our control. Now there's a strange mix in there that is after surrender, God still wants our effort there. So there's this combination of efforts and relinquishment of our efforts, and that kind of comes and goes, whether that's minute by minute, year by year, different ways, and that's a tough balancing act to play into. It seems that we're always being called to move toward the opposite direction or something like that. We're called to surrender more. No, we're called to kind of put more effort in. No, we're called to surrender more. It just depends. And that is a continual reminder of our dependence upon God. But it should also be, there also should be some kind of a sense of peace or accomplishment. When we look, if you think about like the Psalms and Proverbs in particular, there's this joy in obedience or joy in responding to God. There's joy in making the effort to love people and to do the hard work of doing the right thing. And then today we'll look at chapter 4, and this is, if we look at the 12-step recovery programs, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. It's a short sentence, but there's a lot to unpack there. It's a searching. Searching is an ongoing verb. It doesn't say that we did it once and we were done, but it is a continual search. It's fearless, and to be fearless, you have to have courage. You have to be. Why do we even talk about fear if we're just talking about doing a moral inventory of ourselves? Why even mention fear? Because what you're going to find is as soon as you start digging, it gets real scary. So we're going to come face to face with fear, and that means have courage and be fearless. And this is where I'm sure we're going to find we'll start to go back to the other steps and bring them into practice now, because in order to be fearless, we're going to have to go back to powerless. Because as soon as we're afraid, what we tend to do is we try to control that fear in some way. There's the standard human responses of fight, flight, or freeze. So we try to do something to react to the fear so that the fear won't overcome us. But if we surrender, imagine surrendering to fear. That's the only way you can be fearless, which is weird. It's like allowing the fear to exist and acknowledging that the fear is there, that's actually the step toward being fearless. When we fight against it, or when we run away from it, or when we get paralyzed by it, that's when the fear holds on to us and we can't do anything. So that's the. Now let's look at these next few texts. I was thinking today as I was kind of prepping that I'll try in this chapter. I'm just gonna read us through these paragraphs instead of just focusing on the highlighting. I'm gonna read us through a paragraph, and then we can stop and go back to these points, because I think we're essentially spending about that much time anyway, just with our highlights. So let's go next to the scriptures that are included today. Psalm 50, sacrifice gives you no pleasure. Were I to offer a holocaust, you would not have it. My sacrifice is this broken spirit. You will never scorn a crushed and broken heart. So this is the word of the psalmist. The Holocaust is utter desolation. That's what this means. So that's Psalm. Let's look at our next text. If inside you have the bitterness of jealousy or selfish ambition, never make any false claim for yourselves or cover up the truth with lies. So this is another inside look, and this comes to us from James, the epistle, chapter 3, verse 14. And Matthew 26, be awake and pray that you pass the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So these are some of the scriptures that are kind of associated with an inside look. We can see that whether these were written 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, wow, humans haven't changed that much, have they? It's scary to take a look inside. And before we go on here, let me just read Maggie's comment for us. She says she read step 4 last night and started answering the questions in the back of the book this morning. This shadow boxing is really teaching me some honesty about myself. So the shadow is going to be something that we'll definitely touch on as we move forward. It's going to come up here really quick. I'm glad you did that. And it's easy to forget these chapters do have questions, kind of questions to meditate on for the reading. So they're available for us.
Why did he name this chapter A Good Lamp? I couldn't see the connection.
Well, you need a lamp when you go into a dark place. Yeah. And it's kind of like Good Friday. Going into a dark place doesn't sound like a good thing, but at the end of the day, the lamp will help you, and it ends up being a liberating experience if we do it right.
So the truth will set you free.
Yes.
I thought that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's actually the James here text. Never make any false claims for yourself or cover up the truth with lies. So as soon as we start to come face to face with ourselves, there's a tendency to get defensive or to make excuses or to cover it up with lies. All right, lie to ourselves, essentially. No, I'm not like that. That's not me. It couldn't be like that. That couldn't be me. I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't dream of that. So several things in here. Is there anything that jumps out at you about these texts here this morning?
Do you mean those scriptures?
These 3 scriptures? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
So we can acknowledge there is a struggle inside of us. We want to, but we don't want to. But the Apostle Paul's take on this, I think, is in Romans, where he talks about the wretched man that he is. It's like, I want to do the right thing, but I find myself doing the wrong thing, and I want not to do the wrong thing, but I do it anyway. He's torn. So we can experience that. We want to. I mean, I'm sure that's at the heart of anybody that is going through something of the 12 steps. It's like, if you're showing up to pick up a book, to join a group, you want a change. You want a difference. You're making an effort, and you may have wanted it for a long time, but along the way, you might kind of have to drag yourself through the process, because like this says here in the Psalms, it gives us no pleasure. Sacrifice gives us no pleasure. Going through this is not fun. It's very painful and it's very scary, and that's why we don't do it. Life is hard enough. Why would I submit myself to worse things? Actually, when I've mentioned being a part of a support group ministry for a number of years, and the head minister of this group was this. At the time, he was like 83 years old, and he was a missionary for like a huge portion of his life, and his life was dedicated to this ministry, and he would talk about, in inviting people to go through the 12-step programs, he would say things to people like, if you are presently in the middle of a crisis in your life, this is probably not the time to go through this program, because what happens is you're gonna make things worse for yourself. It's almost like you need to stop the bleeding first. It doesn't mean that you are waiting until you're better, but what it means is you need to get past the center of the crisis, get out of the storm, and then you need to go through the 12 steps. We might be most motivated by crisis
Would it be like
to
trying
start
to
something.
repair your house during the middle of a hurricane?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You're gonna need energy. You're gonna need focus. You're gonna need clarity. And in the middle of crisis,
Well, in the middle of
our
the crisis, you can't see
perspective,
what the problem
our
is.
perspective is it's blurred over. We're feeling stuff that is not related to most of our life experience. So I think it's a good something. It is a difficult process. So if you're already, right after a great tragedy in your life, that's not the time to do, moral inventories. Your results are going to be way off. In the middle of crisis, you're like, I hate everybody and life is horrible and all this kind of stuff. So it just adding more to that, it's going to, it's not going to work out. All right, let's dig into our first paragraph. Those who were raised in highly moral families or with a strict religious upbringing will usually recoil at step 4. They're so tired of judging themselves and the judgmentalism toward others that comes with it that they tend to resist any searching and fearless moral inventory. Perhaps it did not work for them in the past, but only made them more self-preoccupied and in a negative way besides. Analysis is paralysis is surely true for many people. So that's our first paragraph. Anybody resonate with that or have that experience for themselves? I know that's my personal experience.
Yeah.
So if we've grown up from the beginning being told that we need to be introspective and we need to fix the problems within, it's likely that at some point later in the journey you're going to be turned off by that approach because you want a relief from it, because it and I don't know, with the 12 steps, it might be that you do the hard work and then you need to give yourself a rest. You need to take a Sabbath for a time Just enjoy your life. Don't overanalyze and then pick it back up again. I was talking to my brother the other day about we were talking about our upbringing in a very conservative church, and I told him that it was maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I went back to a worship service in that church with a friend of mine who I think was having his children dedicated, and so we were there to be supportive and stuff. So they had their time with children, before the kids go on and go to Sabbath school. And so the topic for the kids' time together was the weeds in their life. So this idea is that you have things growing that need to be plucked, and this is the sin in your life and the naughtiness and the bad stuff like that. And I was like, you see, that's why I'm not here anymore because I had so much of that and so much introspective. When you're constantly looking for the problems within yourself, eventually pretty early on, you start to say like, well, what am I other than just like a sin factory? I mean, if all I do is screw up, I'm a mess. I'm just a piece of whatever. I'm a worm. I'm worthless. And I think there is a place for coming to that, to having that idea, but you can't live there because that's not the whole truth. It's not. It's not the whole truth. It's always intrigued me that the Orthodox Church, which split away from the Catholic Church, or it was one church in 534 or something like that, when they split between the Western, which became the Roman Catholic Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, which was more like in the area of Turkey and in the Middle East. One of the differences between these, there's quite a few, is this fundamental idea of do we naturally lean toward evil, or do we naturally lean toward good? So the starting point can make a big difference in your life. If you grow up believing that if you were left on your own, you would go off the rails. You can't help it. You are a natural screw up. That's who you are. On the other hand, you're naturally a good person, but you do bad things or you make mistakes, but naturally, if you just kind of let yourself go, you'll do good things. You're going to love people. You're going to want to do the right thing, etc.
I remember growing up, I can't remember all of it, but you're saying that which way you lean. There was a family where the children were always, they did everything wrong. I mean, their parents couldn't find anything right that those kids did. And it affected them their whole life. Oh my gosh. I mean, I know in my own house, my mother, bless her soul, she could see the good in everything. I mean, it was almost to the point of, can you dial it down a little bit? Because
you don't think you're like that too, Bob?
Not like her. Wow. I mean, well, the example even Carol knows is back in the 80s when Muammar Gaddafi was at his heyday, and my mother, like I said, she found the good in everybody.
Except him.
And she was watching, the evening news was on, and she and Dad and and Carol was there, the four who were watching the news. And the habit at my parents' house was, you stood up when you watched the news.
Really?
We have no idea why.
I don't know why. It just, that was
Only
it.
had 50
That was,
minute news.
yeah, thank God it was the Huntley Brinkley thing, so it was only 30 minutes. But Muammar Gaddafi was doing whatever, and my mother stood there just in total silence the whole time, and then she says, somebody needs to do something about that man. And we all looked at each other and like, did you hear that?
Wow.
Like, oh my God.
It had to be bad to say
Oh,
that.
it was, I mean, that's the worst she ever got.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was,
She was.
but, yeah, I mean, there's a difference between being raised in a family where they always see the good in things, or they always see the bad in things. You need a little bit in the middle, you know. But that's spot on with the family being raised where they always see the bad in the child, and they're always correcting them, and you're just a screw up, you'll never, I can remember there was a
Well,
family
why-
where that was one
why-
of the favorite lines in the family. You're just a screw up, you'll never amount to anything.
And,
It's like,
and at some point you'll believe it, and then why fight it? If
Yeah.
it's pointless to fight about it, just lean into it.
yeah, yeah.
I think it's just accepting things just as it is. You look at it, that's the way it is. And then it's up to you to find the good or to release the other part.
It's kind of a balancing perspective there.
That's it, but in the meantime, pull that neutral route, put it in neutral before you decide which way you want to go back or forward.
There is a concept in a lot of spiritual paths that will encourage non-judgment, which
We were told in the Bible
is
not to judge.
yeah, we're told not to judge. So part of that, it means kind of coming into things from a neutral perspective. From the Christian point of view, what we might lean into is to say, God is always using all the things that happen in this life toward something that brings wholeness and completeness and purpose and meaning. And even though we may like some things and not like other things, we can be accepting and open. We don't have to be afraid that everything is going to just, go south and become something horrible. That's one way of kind of doing that. I've found that text the Jesus text about not judging. I found that interesting to come back to. So I think one of the initial ways, at least that I had interpreted that, is don't be too strict, or this idea of judgmentalism is seeing the negative in something, pointing out the problems, and it has this negative slant toward things. And essentially it's kind of similar to, if you're not a forgiving person, don't expect to be forgiven. It kind of leans into that. Now, another way to look at that is that is judgment means that you're analyzing something and coming to some sort of conclusion about it. You're attaching meaning to particular things. So you could judge something to be good or judge something to be bad, like Jay was saying, and that means you can go through, starting with something neutral, and through your own conscience or experience or wisdom, or through the leading of the Spirit, you can say, I believe this is the right way, this is the wrong way. And so that type of a judgment is not where we say a judgmental person, which is like always pointing on the negative. This is more neutral. But if you think of it that way, if you think of it as coming to a conclusion about something, then what that means is the framework that you use to come to your conclusions, however that is arranged, is the thing that you will look at yourself through. So judge not lest ye be judged. So if you use that to analyze and come to conclusions about other people, you're going to use the same metrics against yourself at some point. So that in that sense, that's a kind of a different
It's also
a different
written that
teaching.
If you're going to judge righteous, good judgment.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you're going to make a judgment, if you can make a judgment, if you're going to judge righteously and with goodness.
Right.
In other words, to see the good in it. Otherwise, if you're going to be judging and seeing the negative in it, in other words, don't judge lest you be judged yourself, like you just said.
Right.
And because for the judgment that you give is a judgment you're going to receive yourself somewhere down the line.
I've heard the judgment of God described in two different ways. And I'm going to try to remember the words here. One is punitive. So that would mean if you do something wrong, you'll be punished for it. The other is, I'm gonna forget the exact word. Essentially, what the other one is a redemptive conclusion that's brought upon your life. And so there's an acknowledgement that there is something wrong, but God's judgment is done in a way that brings the opportunity for things to be made whole. When you get punished, you're not being given an opportunity to make things whole per se. It's more like an eye for an eye, or it's like you're using fear to try to rewire somebody's brain so that when they come to a similar decision, they're going to choose the one that doesn't get them another spanking or doesn't, so those are different things. We should look at rehabilitation. That is the way that we should, but it's very easy for us as humans to look instead at revenge. And I think a lot of people probably look at God as a God of revenge. When that word wrath is used, usually there's this picture drawn up in our minds about how God is kind of getting revenge and punishing for something that has been done wrong.
That's the Lord's part, though. I think the law, that part of them, it's like a separation of God is good and very good in one aspect. The other aspect is another part. I think I said this before. It's like God is different types of individual person. One is like you're a father, and if you're a minister, it's all these things that you act in a different way and you act in a different capacity. When you don't talk the totality of God, it's all pure good and love and everything there. That's the ultimate part where we're supposed to be trying to obtain. The Lord part, the law part, once you understand it, which is this punishment, God doesn't punish. It's the law part that punishes. It's the law. And the punishment is that you receive yourself as that which you've given. And you're punishing yourself when you come down to the whole part of it, because that law of cause and effect, in other words, what goes around comes around and all that, you're going to receive that. And because we're living in a state of grace, which means it's a delayed action.
Yes, there is this, and that would be kind of the idea of sowing and reaping,
Right.
or the idea of karma, which essentially is like the universe is built in a way that if you do something wrong, it's going to come back to get you. Now that works to some degree in the way that we do things, and I think that's like the golden rule: you do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. So that's kind of the sowing and reaping part. The difficult part of that is that, and this is where like the story of Job comes in, is when you go through something that is horrendous, and you don't understand what you did for that to happen. That's where that way of viewing things becomes a problem, and that's what Job struggled with all of his friends and theological friends. Is essentially they were saying, Job, you know that there's sowing and reaping in this life. You know that karma is the law of the universe. So what goes around comes around. So it came around to you. So what was it that you did to make this fall upon you? And Job is like, I didn't do anything. And so what Job is pointing out is not necessarily that he was a perfect guy, but what he was saying is like, what happened to me, this does not make sense when we look at at life in terms of sowing and reaping, because I can't imagine what I must have done, what I could have done to lose absolutely everything in my life, to lose all the resources, to lose all the family, to lose health, to lose like everything. So it seems like a person would really have to go way out of their way to do a whole lot of bad stuff to lose absolutely everything. So it's really, the book of Job is really a judgment against, or it's saying, yes, you can use sowing and reaping to understand some things, but it really is not all encompassing. There's there can be problems at the end.
In the Gardens Church, we studied Job from the Bible. And to me, it was about Satan saying to God, this guy Job is so good that I can make him fall off, everything go where he curses you. But what's interesting is I have 2 other friends that use not the Bible, but books about Job, where he had sinned and God was saying, you need to change your ways. All they heard were the friends who condemned him. They didn't hear that he was a good man right off the bat.
Right.
I found that so amazing that they were reading something.
Well, I think what that shows is that sowing and reaping concept is so ingrained in us that we have to. It's like either that's the truth or not. It's not that that's the truth, and it's part of also a bigger picture. And we still get to the end of the book and think that that sowing and reaping still is the primary way that God operates in the world. Now here's a little scholarly part to throw a little controversy in the mix. According to scholars, when they look at the material within the book of Job, the last part of Job, the very end of Job, when he gets everything back plus more, is added later.
Oh, really?
So it's possible that people that read Job said like, this doesn't make any kind of sense unless Job can go through the bad stuff and end up coming out on the good side, because then the sowing and reaping thing will kind of balance out. But that's not God's answer to Job at the end of the book. God's answer to Job is, Job, have you noticed that I'm God and you're not God? And Job's like, yes, I forgot that. And that's it. And that's the moral of the story, is that you're not God. And the only way that you can understand everything is to be God. There's going to be some mystery, and we're going to have to trust. And if we get it to the place where we think, I figured out God's game. I figured out this sowing and reaping thing. So if I can just play by the rules, I can get whatever I want. As long as I play by the rules, then I can have a good life and make sure that I don't. And I'm sure there's a lot of us have found ourselves playing that game of really, really trying hard to do things a certain way because we want good results. And so that's another way that we grab a hold of the wheel. But in that sense, then where does the surrender play in? So
I think, though, that this judgment thing, Patty and I were talking very beginning about judging ourselves and feeling guilty. And you had mentioned evaluate the situation. And then as I do that, I often find a lot of that stuff I made up. It was all hallucination. And then later on you'll find from someone that they were thinking something totally different. And so at the end of that, reflecting on an experience, I said to myself 3 times, you can evaluate what you want to do differently, but guilt is hell. And I told myself guilt is hell 3 times, and I never thought about that again.
it is indeed.
I looked at it also, where you were talking about where God rewarded at the end. My interesting thing is what I really truly believe is that it's interest. We're in this state of grace we're living. If we lived in the cause and effect immediately, we wouldn't do or think half the things we do, but because we would feel the immediate effect of it. That's where judgment comes in. I really believe it, because when I had my experience, that was it. All the negative things I'd ever done in my life, I experienced them, but then I also felt the experience that person brought to another person because of my negative activity and so on. If you want to know what hell is, it's a continually going through your own self. But the other part is the love vibration, and every time you've done something really good, in other words, and you don't receive it, especially, and this was one part I found out about, if you're expecting something in return for giving something good to somebody, say, well, I didn't get that back, so I'm not gonna give anymore. But if you're expecting something back, it ceases to be love. It becomes a bargaining thing. There's nothing. It's an even exchange. It just continually goes. God gives interest. We take away the interest on the negative things because it's like a person that's in debt or credit card. You're paying interest on your sins. When you're giving good, you're receiving interest on it. So that's why Job received all those things, because of all the good things he did. He was put on hold for
Right.
those good things to get the immediate reward from it.
Spirit-
The rewards will come.
Spiritual economics here.
It exactly is.
All right, second paragraph. In fact, I'm convinced that some people are driven to addictions to quiet their constant inner critic. It only gives them ever another thing to hate themselves for. What a vicious cycle, and honestly, not an uncommon one. The internalized voices of a demanding parent, a rigid culture, or a finger-waving church persists long after the parent is gone. We move to another country or leave the church. We are now our own problem. That, in fact, is the final value of a moral inventory. Moral scrutiny is not to discover how good or bad I am and regain some moral high ground, but it is to begin some honest shadowboxing, which is at the heart of all spiritual awakening. Yes, the truth will set you free, as Jesus says, but first it tends to make you miserable. The medieval spiritual writers called it compunction, the necessary sadness and humiliation that comes from seeing one's own failures and weaknesses. Without confidence in a greater love, none of us will have the courage to go inside, nor should we. It merely becomes silly scrupulosity and not any mature development of conscience or social awareness. So there's a lot in that for us to unpack. Anything stand out to you?
It's like people that move all the time. I say.
What are you running from?
Yeah, it's like you're bringing yourself with you, so no
Right.
matter where you go, you're not going to be happy because,
That same problem is sitting there waiting for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And You're
you.
that problem.
You're the problem.
You're the problem.
Looking at the glass half empty all the time.
What? I couldn't hear you.
The glass half empty all the time?
Yeah. In
Look
other
at the
words,
glass
seeing the
half
negative in every single thing that happens. It's
Right.
an addiction, really, believe it or not.
Right.
They,
So this,
I've seen people just, they can't see the, you could say the nicest thing in the world and find a fault in it.
right. So being driven to addiction to quiet an inner critic, I think a lot of this is addiction is the outcome of a coping mechanism that grabs a hold of us. And this coping mechanism usually tends to be stepping away from something that really does need to be addressed in our life. And if we get into the habit of stepping away from it, then we get caught up in some other problem. Back to Pastor Bill Riley, who was the head of this support group ministry that I was a part of. One of the things that I remember him saying, these tidbits of wisdom that I'd get in my early years as a pastor, I remember him sitting with couples that were coming for marital problems, and in the process, if he ever found that one of them had some kind of a severe addiction, he said, what we're going to have to do before we can even begin to talk about the problems in your relationship is you're going to have to get the addiction under control. And so this is like there has to be like a commitment to look at the issues that are going on in our life, and there has to be a clarity to do that. And what the addiction is it's how our running from the problem and trying to cover up some of the problems has become a problem in itself. So that has to have some kind of a stability before looking
Would you say
inside
that
of ourselves.
The addiction, in that particular instance, that the addiction would be like a third party in the marriage?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. Because what happens is, the addiction creates its own problems with a focus on the highs and the lows, and it's just making sure you kind of maintain some kind of weird version of sanity that is separate from the real problems. So that has to be quieted and has to be at peace in order to figure out what was it that made you do the things that led to addiction in the first place. But you can't see that while you are. It's like, because here's essentially what we're doing is that, like, we have to come face to face with pain. We have to come face to face with brokenness. And there's usually some kind of a story that we have that's connected to that pain or brokenness. This happened to me and it was extremely painful. That happened to me and it was painful. This relationship included a lot of pain. And so what we have failed to do is we have failed to live in the full experience of the pain of that problem, and acknowledge where it's coming from and what it's doing to us. And so we don't want to deal with that. And so that's what makes us to run away from it. So
I had to learn a little bit about alcoholism. I was chairman of the personnel committee about 25 years ago, and the choir director was very good. Came to choir Christmas Eve drunk. I had to learn, as a chairman of the personnel committee, I had to read a lot of stuff. And it seems like what I was reading about it is that if you deny what your problems are, you can never grow. You'll be this 12-year-old when you're 50.
mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a certain, like, it's almost like you're hitting pause on your own personal development. When you decide that I'm not going to face this pain, I'm not going to face this problem, I'm not going to understand the dynamics of it or process the emotions of it. So that's the process, and that's what this inventory is asking us to do, is to look back at our lives and to acknowledge, where did pain occur, where did loss occur, where did disappointment occur, and what was it that was surrounding that at the time. To honestly look at that, and to step back from jumping to conclusions about why things happened or why I felt a certain way, but to really almost like look at it from a neutral perspective or a third-party perspective, so that you can fully integrate that experience into your life and experience the wisdom that can come from it, and the healing that can come from it, and the wholeness that can come from it, and then you experience the freedom to continue the journey. But if we have, like, all of these, just this pile up of all these horrible circumstances that are so painful, and it's just too much, it's easy to just turn it off and say, like, I'm not going to face that anymore. And the way that I can not face it is, and we all have kind of our preferred ways of not facing that stuff.
If you were in the middle of a situation like that, you wouldn't even be thinking about, what did I do wrong? That thought is not going through your mind when you're in the middle of something.
Right. There's always going to be hindsight that might give us a little bit of clarity. But I do think with time and wisdom, if we've learned how to trust how life is unfolding, whether we like it or not, and be okay with it, just kind of like taking steps forward even in the moment toward accepting those things, I think it is possible to kind of more fully process it right while it's happening. But there's always going to be hindsight. There always will be some hindsight. But I think there is a way, and this is where, like, the spiritual writer Eckhart Tolle, who's was on Oprah and wrote the book The Power of Now. One of this really huge insights that he brought is, like, there's only the moment. There is really the past and future is just they're constructions in our mind. It's imagination. There's only the now. And so it's learning how to fully bring ourselves into the now, to not analyze things or think about the future impacts of things or to let it bring up past things, but it's really engaging fully in the now. So that what that means is you're feeling the good stuff, you're feeling the bad stuff, you're holding off on your judgments, you're not over analyzing things, you're just really engaging in the experience of each and every moment. And there's a higher likelihood that you'll process that in a healthy way as you move forward in life, and won't have to kind of dig stuff up as much as if we go through life and don't pay attention and are not absorbing it. Then it's like it's almost like you're running around with a backpack and you're just constantly throwing stuff in the backpack, and you just as you move along, and at some point you're gonna just be stuck.
I think this, I forgot what he calls it here, shadow boxing. I was kind of surprised decades ago. I would watch English television shows on PBS stories, and in England they'll say a lot. They'll have something, a situation will happen. Somebody asks about them, and they'll say, "I need time to sort this out." I don't think I've ever heard an American say that.
We don't have time for that.
I was very surprised at that way of looking at things.
There is in our society we tend to be a forward-looking culture. We're always thinking about the future, planning for the future, analyzing how our current step is going to impact the future, looking to progress, looking to grow. And it's like any culture that's young is going to be just like a young person. A young person is, in the moment, thinking about the future, all the possibilities and everything like that. It's not until you've been around the block for a while that you start to go, you kind of like slow down and think about things a little bit more carefully. You've kind of picked up that if I don't handle this now, it's going to come back to get me. So there's a wisdom moving forward that maybe we just need to be around a little bit longer, That might be part of it. Maggie says, when I punish myself, I don't give myself the opportunity to change and do good or do better. If I like that. It's almost like if we believe in punishment as the solution, then when punishment is administered, that's it. It's done. I screwed up. I got punished. Moving on. There's jokes about, or there's a jokingly, we can look at the confessional as Protestants. We look at the Roman Catholic confessional oftentimes as, well, you can just go do whatever the hell you want. You just got to go get punished in the confessional, and then you back to do whatever you want. So the same, I've experienced it, and I've talked to other people that have experienced where they've actually gauged ahead of time. It's like, I know if I do this, I'm going to get the belt, But you know what? This might be worth the belt.
I grew up in a very Catholic neighborhood in Wisconsin.
Right.
And boy, let me tell you what, the neighborhood full of kids, it was Catholic. And boy, I tell you what, the way the kids would plan out on what they were going to do, and the way this and the punishment, whether it be a punishment at home or have to go to confessional at church, it was just like way too much work.
So it's a much simpler way to view consequences, but it's not a really honest and mature way to view consequences, because as we go through life and we start to realize the complexity of the decisions that we make, we start to realize the things that we do really do have a ripple effect on our own lives and on the lives of the people around us. This is why, probably why, I think it's Deuteronomy, God is telling Moses to tell the people, I will visit the sins upon the fathers, and up until the third and fourth generation are going to receive the consequences of the sins of the children. And so there's it's this ripple effect where it's not that simple. It's not just do something bad, get punished, and move on. And the really cool thing about this is that this is actually is connected to, I think, the creative aspect of God's character that God places within us. Is that God is asking us to make decisions and to have an impact on our world so that it can flourish and it can grow and it can change. But what's going to happen along the way is our mistakes, our short-sightedness, our selfishness, those are going to get factored into as well. So, the simple things we say are things like every community deserves the leader that it has.
Yeah.
Because it is this group effort toward this is what we want us to be. So this is kind of just it's like a symbol of what we have become. And now that doesn't, what we also have to remember is that also factors in the grace of God using these things for a greater good. Because, we can look at mistakes that we've made or tough times that we've been through, and we can see silver linings. We can see the benefits, and we can see the growth. So that that factors in there as well. But there still seem to be consequences that we deal with, even if there has been forgiveness and moving on.
It's like generational curses.
Yeah.
Because we pass it down.
Right. It is, and it's not just like a mystical thing or a magical thing that of the curses. I think the curses is like a simplification of it. But if you look at the nature of it, we have studies of genetics at this point in time where we're living that we've never ever had in human history, where they can actually see genes getting passed on, exactly what traits are getting passed on from one generation to the next. It's not just blue eyes or dark hair, but it is, there can be tendencies towards certain diseases, or there can be tendencies towards certain strengths. And so that gets passed on, one generation to the next. And then on top of that, the interesting thing is there's something called plasticity, which means the environment around us and the decisions that we make actually has an effect on the genetics that we pass on. It changes our genetics. Our body changes with the decisions that we make in the environment that we're in. So that's another example of it's blessings and curses. The Deuteronomy text actually is more positive than negative. Everybody remembers the visit the sins of the third and fourth generations, but the next couple of texts says something like, but the blessings that the children receive will be to the 1,000th generation. What? I mean, 3 and 4 versus 1,000. So that says grace. The grace of God is so abundant that's getting passed on to us. And I think this idea of plasticity and genetics and environment. My son has a degree in neuroscience, and so he's studied the process of the brain, and he confirmed with me in conversations, it's never just genetics or just environment. And there's always been that debate on what is it that really impacts the next generation. It's never one. And we can never say, it's because there's always this combination of them, because our environment and our decisions and our life affects our genes. and then our genes affect our behavior, and then our behavior affects our genes. We can't separate these things from one another. So we are becoming what we were, and growing from there in the good ways and in the bad ways. It's fascinating.
You're talking about a great-great-grandfather did the bad things, and that's gonna go all the way down?
That's cursed. But you
Whoa.
know, I have.
That's the curse, but then the blessing goes down 1,000 generations.
But the blessings also, this, the other thing is how you react to that thing that's happening to you.
That's right.
Due to natural fault. And if you react in a proper way, that thing becomes literally a blessing. When
Right.
it comes right down to it. But if you touch it
Right.
and pass it on to the next one, you know, a
It's
negative attitude,
it's
that's what happens.
isn't it interesting that the text says third or fourth? Why not just 3? Why not just 4? So that makes us think like, well, can I make it 3 instead of 4? What if I'm the third? Can I stop it? And so there's lots of books have been written on ending the curse and not passing it down. Probably you can have a significant difference in the effects of what's passed down. But if we look at our genetics, I mean, we're passing typically we're passing our genetics pretty early on in life. So we haven't had the chance to become the wise and mature and whole people that if we're passing on who we are, it sure seems like it would be better if we pass it on at the end of our life
Yes.
instead of at the beginning of our life. But I guess that's just
what
the way.
I say, like I have Mason, he's my great-grandson, and I think, I wish I was the person I was now when I was the mom,
And that's what grandmas are for,
And then
right?
great-grandmas.
And
You learn
great-grandmas,
so
right?
much. And then I did the 23andMe,
Mm-hmm.
and it said I get my lack of sense of direction from my Neanderthal man. And I was like, he was in big trouble. Not a yes.
My
crazy.
son-in-law Tim was so energetic, he'd come home, he couldn't sit. And now, of course, we have this granddaughter of his that's wearing the women in the family out because she's inherited just that energy.
Right.
And that's not a curse. That's wonderful if you're going to be a ditch digger or a carpenter. Or, when I grew up on the farm, I had no energy. It turned out I had low blood sugar, but I might as well have been an idiot because on a farm you're useless if you don't have energy.
Right.
Although they were pretty good about it. They taught me to drive the tractor so I didn't have to do physical work.
I have heard, and I don't know if this is based on research and all that, but I have heard that there are more similarities between grandchild and grandparent than there are between parent and child.
Absolutely.
And if I can see it in my own family and in my own life. The parent-child has kind of this kind of a resistance toward each other, and then you get to the other one, and a lot of it. Yeah. Anyway.
Because my daughter is just like my mother, and I'm just like my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's amazing.
Yep. Any kind of I think this. So let me just speak to this shadow boxing, and then we'll kind of close. So the idea of shadow work is actually something that I think it was first developed by the psychologist Carl Jung, and the idea is that as human beings, one of the things that we do in this life to help us navigate and be a part of it is we create a mask that we present to the world, or we create a persona or an ego or whatever. So we create a presentation of who we are to the world. Now, we may do it slightly differently from person to person. We may be a certain way with one person and a little bit different with somebody else. And then when we're in a group setting, we're like this, and so on. But there is this idea of presenting the self. And so his concept is to say we need to acknowledge that this is not our true self. and this is not our full self. This is somewhat of a creation of who we are. Now, we can believe that this is who we are, but in reality, what we need to do is to look deeper. And so then he talks about the shadow self, and what the shadow self is it's the part of us that we don't want to acknowledge. It's the part of us that we don't want anybody to see, including ourselves. And so there's things called shadow work, which is it's probably tied into this moral inventory in a way, where we look at the things we don't want to acknowledge, the things that we are afraid of, things that are painful to us, things that we're ashamed of. They could be weaknesses of some sort. And we have to be, in order to be a whole person, we have to reconcile who we present to the world and who we are on the inside. Now, the shadow self is not your true self either, but it is the part that you have hidden away in the shadows, that you have kept away from the world and from your own recognition. And we can go through life so skillfully that we intentionally forget that there is a shadow, or we refuse to acknowledge that there is a shadow. So when you come across somebody who we would say is self-aware, somebody who really knows who they are as a person, it's usually somebody who is okay. They've made amends, or they have come to acceptance of the parts of them that they really don't like. So some of the moral inventory, that would be a way to do a moral inventory. You know, there may be some good things that we present to the world. There may be some negative things that we present to the world. And there may be some good things that are in the shadows, or there may be some bad things that are in the shadows. But there are things that we don't want to acknowledge. And there's reasons why, there's theories why they are in the shadows. Typically, what they say is something has happened to you in life that has caused you to realize this is a part of who you are, and you're like, no, that's not who I am, and then we just kind of throw it back into the shadows. It's another hard work to do. It's a challenging work to do, but what it does when we uncover it is it helps us to know why it is that we do the things that we do. It's almost like tapping into your subconscious and realizing, oh, that's why I like certain things or don't like certain things. That's why I respond to certain people. So one of the things I like to tie it in with the teaching of Jesus, where he talks about the log in the other person's eye and the speck in our own eye. This is probably something to do with our shadow, because what we see in that person that's so obvious, their shortcomings and their lack and the part that we don't like that kind of triggers us, when we can clearly see that in another person, there is a very strong possibility that is actually a part of our shadow. And so what we do is we fight against them instead of coming to terms and loving and having compassion and incorporating the other part of ourselves.
I think it could be a little bit good, though, is if I see someone with a speck, and I think, ooh, I do that, I don't want to do that anymore. It could
Yeah,
be.
sure.
Sometimes I have to see, when I project, I have to see it in the other person to recognize that it's in me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It can be a great benefit because you can watch it play out in front of you without having to go through it necessarily yourself, or maybe you recognize a pattern. It's like, oh, I think I might do that.
But if you do a moral inventory, should you do it just by yourself, or do you think it would be a good idea to have a trusted person with you as you kind of dig through your attic of memorabilia?
I think primarily it has to be with yourself. Because if using the shadow analogy, what will happen when you bring another person in is you're going to put on your mask with them. Because we always present ourselves to other people,
Okay.
even if they're trusted. You know, for example, we might shift into like a father-son mode with a person that we trust. We like, I trust this guy; he's like a father to me, and he'll tell me. But when we get into that, then we're going to be relating to them in a certain way where we might not be as honest with ourselves as we should be, and that other person really might not know. they really might not know what your shadow is. They might be projecting their own shadow onto your diagnosis and telling you, well, this is the problem with you. And this happens in therapy all the time. The therapist has some problem and they're probably diagnosing everybody else with it. You know, it's like that you go to see any doctor and it's, guess what? The eye doctor wants you to do something with your eye, and the surgeon wants you to have surgery, and the oncologist wants you to take chemo. And it's like, whatever their solution is
If you got a hammer, everything's a nail.
exactly. Yes.
Did you want to say something, Penny?
I was just gonna say, that, you know, this fourth step, just from my experience, I know I was told, I've done several of them too. I was told I could never write too much, but I could write too little, and I didn't know the first thing about how to write it, but my very first one started as far back as I could remember, and just wrote memories, and, but also, the fourth step is about looking at me and writing down things. The fifth step is what Bob was talking about. Then we admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs.
Right.
And then sharing that, and that's the hard part, because
Sure.
I know in my experience in recovery that a lot of people relapse because they don't do the fourth step. I'm not saying because of that, but it's like they're too afraid to look at themselves and go into that.
Right.
And then I hear people share all the time, I was so afraid to do it, and then I did it, and it's free. It's, you know, as hard as it is to acknowledge or admit those things.
Because what we find as when we get the wisdom that you do from this step is, as you start to go through life, you'll catch yourself.
It's like we find out as bad
You'll
as
catch
we
yourself. You'll understand better why you see the world the way that you do.
And we're not as bad as we think we are, and we're also not as good as we think we are.
Right.
And it's accepting all of it,
Yeah.
the humility to like own all of it.
Right. Right.
That's good.
Yeah, the humility is key, and it doesn't mean humility doesn't mean that we think we're dirt, but humility is that balance. Yeah, where you're acknowledging there is a freedom in it. I mean, when you see people and meet people that have that freedom, it's like it's so amazing to watch somebody completely just be themselves, and it doesn't mean. This is the false version of this is when you like kind of force yourself on other people or project this thing on other people. It's like so there's the phrase you hear it a lot. It's like, I'll use the tamer version of it. I don't give a crap, right?
No.
So that attitude often is a substitute for you being your authentic self. And so the first step toward that, a person might be, well, I don't care what anybody thinks. And usually the person that says that is very, very much concerned with what people think and what they think of themselves. It's a projection, or it's a false reaction. The intention, there's a recognition. They're very close to recognizing it. You know, they're just one word off.
Yeah.
You know, I don't give a crap. It's like, well,
I do.
if you take off the knot, you really do. All right. Well, believe it or not, we're
We're overtime? Wow.
we're ways over time. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May His thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray. Send us out in the power of your Spirit,